Good morning, everyone. How are you doing today? Good. It's a great day. Big announcements yesterday. Minister Wilkinson was here announcing a lot of investment into the area, into mining in Ontario, specifically for Tikmikshing, 2.7 million going to two production drills, which will be used at the new Stobie pit just down the road. So very grateful for that. Um, yeah. So how are you enjoying the conference so far? It's good. That's great. Great. Another big announcement: Habs beat the Leafs last night, 1-0. And I just want to do a special shout out. My friend and colleague Curtis, he lost the bet, obviously, so he's got to wear that nice, beautiful hat there today. So thanks for being a good sport, and don't plan the parade just yet, there, Curtis. But yeah, so it's great that you're all here again. I too have been learning a lot about the conference, speaking with Sinead and her colleagues. I've learned a lot too of what the organization does, and I think it's very appropriate that it's here because we have a lot of work to do here in this area. We have lots of building to do, lots of relationship building. We have to build a lot of capacity, and I think we just have to generate more interest too in the interests of the nations that are impacted by the mining in this area. And most, speaking on behalf of the Tikmishing, these are our lands, and we have 5 operating mines on our lands. And then we have our sister nations too that are impacted in the Robinson Huron Treaty. We have our very close neighbor Wanapate that we are working very close with in our business capacities, and we're building that relationship. So there's a lot of capacity that we have to build, and these conferences are so important to help us because it brings in all of these beautiful people with all of these different expertise, and I'm hearing in all my conversations, I'm hearing new things. And just at the table I'm at, I heard about how we can be more involved in the regreening process in our lands here, and so I'm very grateful for that. And that's why I like coming to these sessions, because I too have to learn a lot about mining. um, I have I am an entrepreneur. I did work on a mine site, and I learned so much while I was there. One of the biggest takeaways for me was the safety culture that we have here in Canada. It is so needed, and I carry that culture with me in all of my other job sites when I work in remote First Nation communities on housing projects. So that's one takeaway. But we also have a duty to make sure that the land is taken care of. And we had a wonderful ceremony yesterday at the Stobie site, and we had our elder Nokomis Julie there, and she talked about the need to recognize not only the indigenous people in the area, but the land itself, our four-legged friends, the flora and the fauna. We need to remember that just by spraying hydroseed, it's not the same. We need to do better. We need to reclaim the land so that it was as close as possible to the way it was before that land was disturbed. Because we do have to be mindful of our four-legged friends. They were here too. We all lived in harmony. We need to maintain that, and that has to be part of the plan moving forward as we talk about development in any area really. And so Tikmikshing, we're trying to position ourselves to be more proactive, and so that we can participate in those processes. And it has to start with the companies, with the organizations, with the governments coming together and say, okay, we're going to do this. We can't wait anymore. We have to keep doing this. We can't just wait for legislation to say, okay, this is no. It has to be part of every closure plan, of every strategic plan that we are developing here. And so we have to make those changes. And so I just wanted to say too, I saw Meredith there too, but we are working. Oh yeah, we are working closely with the city, talking about how Tikmikshing can have an impact, a greater impact in our lands here, working with the city, because we know there's strength in numbers. We do need to have allies. We do all need to work together, because the bottom line is mining is great if it benefits everybody, and at the end of it, the land is taken care of. it's sustainable for 7 generations. So that should be our goal when we talk mining. It should be about how can we do this sustainably? How can we make sure everybody is going to benefit? And at the end of the day, we're all going home safe and sound. So I just want to say, on behalf of Atikmashing, welcome you all, and I look forward to the discussions and the report to follow. Miigwech.
Oh, shoot, I forgot my notes, but I don't need notes for this like warm welcome that I'm going to give to Mark Podlasley, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer for the First Nations Major Project Coalition. Mark and I have worked together for the past 2 years, and he certainly showcases the great work that the FNMPC does in terms of supporting our members, but also advocating on behalf of all First Nations in Canada for equity partnerships with major project development. I'm not going to take up Mark's time. He can do that for himself. I know that he has a hard stop at 9:30, so I'm going to get off the stage and let him come up here and give you his presentation. Miigwech.
Good morning. My hard stop is because it's my wife's birthday. I have a 14-year-old who is desperate for me to be home to Vancouver by 10 p.m. tonight so I can share in the cupcakes. Uh, I do a lot of work with large companies around the world. I do not fear the mining departments, legal departments, but I do fear a 14-year-old with cupcakes. So I will be fast. Um, Hello, everybody. My ancestral name is Tasha. Given name is Mark Podlasley. I'm a member of the Intlakaʻam First Nation, which is in southern British Columbia. We are near Kamloops, if you know British Columbia. And I am the Chief Sustainability Officer at the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. The coalition, and I'll explain more in a minute about it, is a nonprofit Indigenous-led organization now of 175 First Nations across Canada who want to participate in major projects in their territory. 175 nations is approximately 1/3 of all the First Nations in Canada. These are nations who want to participate, to have Indigenous values in the environmental decision-making and the economic benefits that can come from major projects. At times we hear in the media, and industry will say this to us, that, oh, Indigenous people are against projects. It's not true. Indigenous people are pro-smart projects. And so what I want to explain to you now is some of the work that we're doing in the coalition and the importance of having Indigenous values in the decision-making, as you heard this morning, which was presented as well, about 7 generations. The thinking about how do we have a sustainable future, not just environmentally, economically, and socially. So the information I have is on slide. I have a clicker. So I want to start here. The driver for this right now, for the coalition and for many of us here, is the energy transition. The energy transition is going to require an incredible amount of investment. On screen right now, you have a report from the Royal Bank of Canada that was published last year, the largest bank in Canada, that points out that the transition itself is going to cost the country approximately $2 trillion in investment to hit 2050 targets to meet net zero. If you expand to the continent, it is 7 trillion, and worldwide, the number keeps changing. It goes from anywhere from 35 trillion up to 256 trillion. It is a phenomenal challenge. But to reach those targets, we will require clean energy, and the big one, which is why we're all here, critical minerals. So in Canada, the main barrier to that has been Indigenous rights. Canada itself is a treaty nation. It is a treaty signed between Indigenous peoples and the Crown about a relationship, about how to manage the relationship around the land and how development would happen. It hasn't worked out well for Indigenous people. The treaties have been broken, they have not been followed, and there is a disconnect at times between what the government thinks their role is of First Nations. What I want to talk about here is how this has all changed in the past 5 to 10 years. And this is very fast. I'm giving 500 years of history in 15 minutes. So if there's pieces missing, understand that. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People came into effect in Canada as a national legislative act. It has within it the concept of free, prior, informed consent. Up to then, Canada previously had been about consultation. but we're moving to an era of consent. That changes how the dynamics work between Indigenous people in industry and Indigenous people in government. So in terms of the declaration, there are 42 rights that are broadly defined. It's in effect in dozens of countries around the world. But the concept of free, prior, informed consent is in those parts right there. There's 5 of them, in the 5 of the rights. But the one that affects us most today is number 28, lands, territories, and resources. So as I mentioned, the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, 175 nations across the country, most of them have some project worth over $100 million proposed in their territories. The coalition is a nonprofit agency or group that we support those nations to get to the table. We do not take an equity position. We are a nonprofit. We are there for the nations. If a nation asks for our support, we provide it for free. We are 70% funded by the federal government, by the Department of Natural Resources, because the Natural Resources Department has realized that Canada has to get to market. If we cannot get the investment in this country to access the minerals and energy for export, we will miss out on the trillions of dollars that is coming, possibly, for investment in these areas. So those nations right now, across the coast to coast and up to the north, this is an old map. We have more in Quebec, and it furthers in Ontario as well. But what these nations want to do is participate. We're supporting 19 projects right now with a total capital expenditure of $48 billion. And they run through the gambit of energy, infrastructure, minerals. And since we're talking about mining here at this conference, those are the 2 that are highlighted right now. We have others coming online. These are where nations have come together and have asked us for support in terms of how do they prepare themselves for negotiations. And in some cases, it's how do these companies organize themselves? How should they organize themselves? A lot of the issues around being Indigenous in this country is that we were never set up as commercial structures. We are set up as nonprofit societies or government agencies, and we were kept apart from each other by a government who saw us as controllable if we were in our silos. But a lot of these projects now, because of the cost, some they're up to $5 billion in terms of an energy pipeline, crossing 25 different First Nations. How do the nations work together? And more importantly, how do we attract capital into a structure which is a government structure? One fact, if you're from outside Canada, is that we as Indigenous people in this country are wards of the state. We do not have the right to own anything. Everything we have is held in trust for us, even our lands, our clothing, our glasses. These are legally part of the property of the Crown, held in trust for our use. So this jacket, it's His Majesty's. He didn't need it today, so I've got it. But that is a challenge for us when we try to access capital, because if you go to the bank and you want to take out a loan or a mortgage and they ask for your collateral, what do you think they're going to say when you say, oh, I don't own anything, not even my clothes? The cost of capital in that case will be credit card rates, 35, 36, 40%. It's impossible then for us as nations to make those investments unless we have workarounds. And that's what the coalition is here to do. So on our website, you will find reports, and these are free to anyone who wants. They're online. There's dozens of them. We have nations come to us with a problem. We will try and find a solution. The big one, of course, I mentioned was capital, but we have addressed critical minerals. Online, there's a report that goes into what the Indigenous opinion is on critical minerals. What are the challenges? What are the barriers? What has to overcome? What government changes would be useful and helpful for a nation to say yes to a project? And what would be useful from a company's perspective and thinking about how to engage nations? Our publications are always written from an Indigenous perspective, but we keep them as neutral as possible to provide the information for free, prior, informed decision-making. Consent can only come from a First Nation, but our job is to make sure that all the information is on the table so parties can make a decision that is informed. In 2022, our entire conference, we hold an annual conference, was on net zero. And it was on the questions of everything we're talking about. How do you future-proof mineral supply in a manner that is good for the economy, good for the world, and good for us being the hosts of these projects? You'll see on there a nuclear primer as well. Believe it or not, there are First Nations here who have interests in the nuclear sector. And so they came to us with that question, can you help us with that? And that is a deep dive into nuclear. When we were doing our research to find Indigenous experts on nuclear, we didn't think we'd find many. We found 3 fully trained and qualified Indigenous women here in the province of Ontario who are certified nuclear engineers. So the talent is in Indigenous communities, but it's not always obvious to those who are outside the communities. So this information, also ESG. It was talked yesterday about what is ESG standards. We had nations come to us being approached by proponents saying, don't worry, we've got an ESG standard by SASB or GRI, one of the world standards. And they said, what does this mean? So we dove into it, find it out. At our conference, we brought those leaders in from London and the United States to explain how they came about of a standard that claimed to represent us as Indigenous people. And just the fun fact, GRI, which is one of the large frameworks used in ESG out of London, has a clause in it that says that Indigenous interests are only material if said nation initiates court action. So think about what that would do to you if you're a proponent going, you want to get your promise through. You show up at our nation and say, we've got this project. And we'll say, excuse me, we have to call a lawyer because we have to get our material interests known to the ESG standards. Counterproductive. Capital, I talked about already. We also have an environmental section, which puts together a lot of the information that our members have put forward about the environmental interests from Indigenous perspectives, from an Indigenous values perspective. So you see on there how to address cultural rights, how to address cumulative rights, how to get involved in the environmental assessment processes. Again, free at that web link. And if you take a look at those, we'd be proud if you downloaded them. If you're Indigenous or not, we have had university and colleges now call us saying that they're using our material because it's the clearest description of things like ESG, like capital markets, like nuclear small modular reactors. Again, dozens of them. I mentioned that we put on a conference every year, and we have it in Toronto this year. It'll be in Toronto again next year, April 28th, 29th. We had 1,700 people show up, evenly divided, 1/3 First Nations, 1/3 government, 1/3 industry. And the reason people come to the conference is that it's an area where we have the best examples we can find worldwide of Indigenous and corporate engagement that honors both sides. Our speakers this year, the initial conference, the keynote speaker leading us off was the CEO of the Bank of America. In the past, we've had the US Secretary of Energy come. We've had the chair of Rio Tinto. We've had the CEO of Anglo American. And we've had leaders from the United States, Indigenous leaders from Canada and across the United States. The one coming up, we will do the same in Toronto. But the reason we do this is because we want our members to see 2 things. What is inspiring in terms of the best Indigenous engagement, and we want companies to understand that they can do better. And we want to embarrass the governments at times to say that, look, this is important. We did one year on the net zero project at the conference. We found a 62 gigawatt green hydrogen production facility being built in Western Australia. It was initiated by the Mirning First Nation, who still retains a 10% ownership stake in it. And when it's built, it will have 3,000 wind turbines, 25 million solar panels. It'll be the largest hydrogen exporter into Japan in the world. And that's Indigenous led. So this year, coming up, it will be the Alaska Native Corporations. The Alaska Native Corporations, there's 12 of them. They're all coming. They're set up in a very different structure than we are in Canada, but they have $11 billion a year, US dollars, revenue. And they have diversified out of Alaska into the lower 48 states and worldwide, and everything from telecommunications to Traeger barbecues to professional services company. And it's an example of what happens when Indigenous people are not fettered by a colonial act called the Indian Act. We want to inspire and challenge industry that they can do better. It's to inspire our people of what's possible. So this is the report from the Net Zero conference. I'm not going to read all those to you, but if you look at that list, the table of contents, this is online for free. It touches everything we've been talking about for the past 2 days. Today's the 3rd day, in terms of critical minerals, future-proofing the future, how to ensure Indigenous values are not swept away in this gold rush for these materials and minerals. So we invite you to go online and take a look. So the reports themselves are very visual. They're very clean-spoken. This is what the information came out from our conference of what the delegations, the Indigenous people wanted to see in mining. Again, very much about what we've been talking about for the past 2 days. The whole concept is Indigenous values are not incompatible with development if it's done right. And given the fact that Indigenous people now have the right of free, prior, informed consent, you've got to get this in place if you're going to get a project off the ground, and there is no way we're going to reach the critical mineral targets net zero by 2050 unless we have this in place. This is, I believe, on page 42 of the report on net zero. So you know most of this, and I'm watching the time, so I have to move through this. The demand for minerals is going to skyrocket. And the only way we're going to get there is if we have Indigenous people, corporate and government working together. And so the amount of minerals is staggering what's going to be required. And this isn't only by 2040. This isn't even by 2050. And these things like nickel in this area, it's 19 times more than what it is today. And that will be in 14 and a half years, less than 15 years. And it just goes on. It's staggering. And if we don't have these, we will not meet the climate targets. The big one here is just shocking, is the one on lithium. 42 times. Canada has the opportunity to meet this demand because we have rule of law, we have developed capital markets, we have advanced standards environmental protection. We have access to everything except this question of Indigenous rights. It has to be incorporated at the beginning, through the construction, through the operation, and through to decommissioning. I am from a nation that is heavily impacted by mining. We host Canada's largest open pit copper mine. And 40 years ago when it went in, we were an afterthought and nothing came of it for us. They used our roads, they passed us up to $1 trillion more has come out of that project and has gone right past us. When they came back for an expansion permit to keep going because copper is in such demand, things were different this time. And we were not against the mine. We wanted to ensure that our youth, our environment, our elders were all benefiting from the resources coming from the ground. And in our case, we don't even have a treaty. We're unceded territory. So the underlying title is still owned by us, but nothing came of it. We now have a permanent fund that's been set up, which is revenues will go into that fund for the long-term prosperity of the community. So when the mine closes, if there will be a hole in the ground, future generations will know that we were not asleep at the switch. We wanted to get something as well for our future. And that provides the certainty for the mine to attract investment to continue the expansion. And that's something we don't have time to talk about today, but the whole question now is, it's not just Indigenous people saying that this is important. Capital markets are saying, have you taken care of the risk? And we're not going to invest money unless that risk is addressed. At the coalition, and you heard yesterday from Saga, we've been invited to delegations trips overseas now to speak to investors. In case of Germany, you were in the UK. Someone else went to Germany, you were in Germany. I've been to Tokyo. I'm going to Tokyo on Monday again with, again, a delegation. Industries on that side, investors are saying, well, how do we get past these Indigenous questions? Are Indigenous people wanting these projects? Same message we will deliver. Yes, if it's done in the right way. So the issue about Sudbury, for example, is if Indigenous parties are on board, a project will be approved, capital comes in for investment, everybody benefits. Jobs, revenues for municipal services, federal taxation, healthcare, it's all going to come from us working together. So I'm not going to read that. The impact on Indigenous people for the net zero transition is going to be massive. Our lands in terms of mining, the impacts are worldwide. Indigenous people will not sign off on these projects unless there is something done differently. And the difference is conversations like this, where people get together and have open conversations and say things openly. We don't have time to go through the past like we've done it for the past 50 years, of being soft-shoed about it. For those of you who are not from Canada, Canadians can be so polite at times, they won't actually say what they want and will just pass each other in conversations. We don't have time for that anymore. And Indigenous people are well aware of that and are well aware of our role in this. And we're well aware and happy to talk if it's done in a respectful manner. I want to leave you with one concept, just to think through about how important it is to have multi-generational thinking and going into this. That it's not just about the quarter, it's about the future of the planet, but it's about a future for all of us. In First Nations, we have this concept here in Turtle Island, the law of 7 generations, and that's from nearby here. It's a Haudenosaunee or Iroquois law of governance that was put in place a long time ago, and this is the key concept I want to leave you with. In every deliberation, we must consider the impact on the next 7 generations. And it's hard for us at times to think more than one generation, but the world and the planet thinks in multiple generations. Nature thinks in multiple generations. Last night, the conversation about the Inco and how it was regenerated and how they come is a multi-generational concept. So I want to leave you with this fun fact. If you consider that the average Canadian or North American age is 76 years, and you multiply that by 7 lifetimes, as per the law of 7 generations, you come up with this number, 532 years. That's what it would be if we had applied this law 532 years ago. And what happened? What was going on 532 years ago? It was 1492. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. It was the arrivals of European here in North America, in Turtle Island, and all of the Americas. That is 7 lifetimes ago. And think of all that's happened since the time he arrived to now. That's within the law of 7 generations in terms of our thinking. How are we thinking about the next 7 generations, the next 7 lifetimes? And right now, that's our job if we want to get out of the crisis we're in and the climate change. Going forward, that's 2556, the other direction. Where are you going to be in 2556? Right here, right? Do the math. Yeah, do the math. So that's what I want to leave you with. Thinking through these questions from an Indigenous perspective in terms of a commercial engagement, in terms of a planetary rescue, has to happen in conversations like we've been doing for the past 2 days. Be honest, be upfront, think monthly generational, and we will be fine. In my language, the word for thank you to an individual is kukschim. The word for thank you to all of you, is in plural, is kukschep. So I say kukschep to all of you for hosting this, engaging, coming honestly to the table to approach a challenge that faces all of us.